È nostro ospite oggi uno dei principali politologi americani, scrittore bestseller, vincitore di 2 Emmy Awards, i più importanti premi della televisione. Di solito lo potete trovare sui più grandi network americani come la CNN e Fox. Quest'oggi è sugli schermi di BD Media ed elezioni USA 2024. È con noi Larry Sabato. Mr. Sabato, thank you very much to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, the presidential election is just around the corner, and this year the race is the most unusual in decades, featuring from one side a convicted felon former president, and on the other side a sitting vice president who entered the race only 3 months ago. However, polls show a race very similar to 2020, without major changes in battleground states, except for a slightly worsened performance for the Democratic candidate overall. Do you believe this is truly the most probable outcome, or should we expect surprises that polls cannot predict?
Well, I'm always open to surprises that polls can't predict because we've had a series of very inaccurate polling years. Certainly 2016, 2020 as well, in which Biden had been projected to win many of the very close states by much wider margins. And we've also had some misses in between in midterm elections. So it's entirely possible that it will happen again. I don't think there will be states outside the 7 that we're watching that are actually competitive. 43 states can be called right now before we get a single vote publicly reported. And that's a shame. I wish there was more competition, but there isn't. So it's very competitive. I think it'll be the most competitive since the year 2000, that George W. Bush versus Al Gore race, which was essentially decided on 537 votes in the giant state of Florida. Well, that's not going to happen again, but I think you'll have quite a number of states that are decided 51-49 or closer.
That means it's going to be a very long night on the 5th of November. Now, let's talk about the states. You mentioned the states. We'll talk about first 2 of the states that they're not mentioned actually in this election. One is Texas and the other one is Florida. So Texas is increasingly becoming a state where Democrats can compete, while Florida is becoming more Republican. Do you believe Texas will be bluer than Florida already this year, or maybe in the near future? And then going to the Rust Belt state, do you anticipate that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will continue their trend of voting as a unique bloc for the same candidate, as they have done since 1988? Or do you foresee any potential difference among these states in this election?
Certainly. Some trends have momentum of their own, and they tend to continue because of demographic trends within the state. And Trump has no problem carrying Texas, but it will be a smaller margin, maybe 5, 6, 7 points, versus Florida, where I'd be surprised if it were not at least 8, 9, could be 10. And you're quite correct. Florida has turned much more Republican. Texas has been turning a bit more Democratic, but I'll believe that that is real when I see a Democrat win statewide, not necessarily for president, but right now the Republicans control every single statewide office in Texas. And while the Senate race this year in Texas is close, the Republican incumbent Ted Cruz has the edge in not just the polls, but I think the view of the pundits in Texas as well.
Now, let's talk about the polls. You said it, polls, they have margin of error. Sometimes they're unpredictable. But we've seen in the past few weeks that the lead that Harris had in the polls is actually shrinking. Do you think she's running a flawed campaign, or this Trump comeback would have happened regardless?
I don't think that much has changed. You have to look at these lists of polls with some degree of discretion, because the Republicans have a very clever technique. They have a number of polling firms that they help to support that turn out very friendly results. And they affect the averages that we see on the online sites that tell us what the polling average is. So I really don't think it's changed all that much. This is a very close election, and the 7 swing states are all close to varying degrees. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin may very well be the closest. but all of them are close to a reasonable degree. So I wouldn't view it that way. I would view this as a highly competitive contest, and no one's going to be shocked if it goes either way.
So essentially, you believe there is a Republican floating in the polls from actually Republican pollsters.
I think that's one clear reason why. Now, as far as Trump gaining some ground, well, some of this is late deciding Republican voters who really don't like Donald Trump. They don't appreciate the way he presents things. They don't like the insults that he hurls at others. And they're reluctant to vote for him. But I've watched this very carefully since 2016. And they, in the end, almost all gravitate to Trump. So that's why Kamala Harris is out there campaigning with well-known Republicans like Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former Vice President Dick Cheney. She's with Kamala Harris a lot at campaign events. And the reason she's there is because Kamala Harris, to win, needs a slice of moderate Republicans, a larger slice than Hillary Clinton got.
Now, what do you consider to be a safe national advantage for Harris to also secure victory in the Electoral College? And then this is a question we asked to all our guests, all the pollsters we have interviewed in the past few weeks. If the election were to be held today, who do you think will win the presidential election and why?
Yeah, well, we're not going to give you a precise prediction because my team, the crystal ball team at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, we don't project until the end. And we do, unlike other groups, call every single state in the presidential race, every single Senate race, every single House race. But we do it at the end for a combination of reasons that I think are quite good. So I won't be projecting it today. We have 2 full weeks to go. And there are October surprises. There are developments right at the end of a campaign that we don't see coming that could push a point or two in either direction. And that would probably be enough to give the election to the candidate that gains the point or two. You asked what would be the safe margin for Kamala Harris. Well, we saw that in Hillary Clinton's case in 2016, she won the popular vote by 2.1%. That was 3 million votes. Normally, that would be enough to give you the Electoral College, except that we have had a polarization in the United States that's making it more difficult for Democrats to get a majority of the Electoral College. I would say, to be on the safe side, Kamala Harris would need at least 3 full percentage points. Joe Biden, who narrowly won the Electoral College because he came so close to losing in some of the states that he eventually won, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, for example. He won by over 4 percentage points. And yet he could have lost the election. Donald Trump could have won the second term that he wants, even while losing by over 7 million votes nationally. This is a product of our archaic electoral college system that should have been abolished a long time ago, but it's in the Constitution and we're stuck with it.
Let me just add a quick question here. Do you think there's still time for an October surprise? Yes, there are still about 10 days until the end of October. That is, there going to be one.
Oh, well, if I knew, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it? Look, we've had them late before. Lyndon Johnson in 1968 announced a complete bombing halt in North Vietnam in order to help Hubert Humphrey, and the Democratic candidate for president, and his vice president. And it almost worked. Humphrey was behind by several points, and he ended up finishing less than 1 point behind Richard Nixon in the popular vote back in 1968. We also had one in 1980 when the Iranian hostage crisis was the headline for many months. And the Carter administration, Jimmy Carter's administration, thought that they had secured a deal with the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. They thought the hostages, at least a deal for the hostage release, would be announced a day or two before the election. And it all fell apart on the Sunday before the Tuesday election. This was back when we all voted on one day.
Mr. Sabato, thank you very much for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation.